Okay, so I'm standing in the vacant car park next to the what was referred to back in 1963 as the City Hall complex. So this is actually a vacant lot, and right behind me is what was known as the Annex building. So that was the building that was built in 1956 and next to the old City Hall building, where of course Harvey Oswald was being held in the custody of the Dallas police and was being interrogated there for obviously the shooting of President Kennedy on November the 22nd, and it was actually in the basement of this building where Oswald was shot and killed at the beginning of his transfer. So I'm in Dallas this weekend for the JFK Lancer conference, and I thought I'd come down here really to, particularly when it's a bit more quieter in the day, to check out the outside of the building, because it's very much, well, pretty much the same as it was back then. Unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to get in there now because while there is an exhibit that commemorates or at least immortalises the basement, the jail office where Oswald was when he was shot, it's not open to the public. You need to be incredibly well connected with the University of North Texas to be able to even get in there. And the building itself, what used to be the City Hall building, is now functioning university campus for the University of North Texas Law School. So very difficult to get in there and actually see the exact location of where Oswald was shot. But like I said, it's still pretty cool to come down here and check out the outside of the building, as it were, because there's a lot to see in terms of people's movements that day, and in particular exactly how Jack Ruby entered the basement that morning. So without further ado, let's check out some sights of around the old City Hall complex. Join me. So just behind me is facing west along Elm Street, and that marquee that you can see in the building is roughly where the Western Union office was back in 1963, and that's where Jack Ruby was alleged to have gone in and cashed a transfer to one of his stripper employees, Karen Carlin, so Little Lynn. $25 that she asked to be transferred because, of course, Jack Ruby cancelled all shows of his Carousel Club on the weekend of November 22nd, supposedly out of respect for President Kennedy. So that spot there is where Jack Ruby was said to have left the Western Union office and walked along Main Street, which is what I'm standing on now, and walk all the way to the Main Street entrance. So we're just going to retrace that journey. So standing outside of 2034 Main Street, and at the time this was a Western Union office, and I gather it was probably a little bit bigger back then, or wider, because apparently there were two doors that people could walk, enter in and out of the building. So Jack Ruby came here. He'd parked his car very close by, and gave apparently his dog Sheba was in the car with him, although that's actually pretty definite. One of his Dachshunds was in the car, along with a few $1,000s of worth of cash in his trunk and his wallet. So all looking very spontaneous, that he decided to just come in, cash the check, and then move on up to City Hall basement to obviously carry out the shooting of Oswald. Okay, so let's track Ruby's alleged journey. So we're walking along, and I'm sorry, I'm only doing this off my phone, so it is going to be a little bit bumpy, but we're tracing Jack Ruby's actual, well, his purported journey that he took after he'd transferred the money, made the wire transfer to Karen Carlin, the Warren Commission, the Dallas police investigation, and you know what, generally the mainstream narrative had it that this is the way that Jack Ruby walked to enter the basement and miraculously be down there in time to, of course, to shoot Oswald as he emerged down in the basement at the start of his transfer. So we're now walking in front of the annex building, the municipal building, which is now working, I gather, county courthouse. But it's still very much in the same, same appearance, at least externally, as it was back in 1963. Okay, so where I'm standing is literally at the ramp opening up on Main Street, and I'm in the position where Roy Vaughan, Officer Roy Vaughan, had been standing from at least 9:15 that Sunday morning, November the 24th, and to well and truly after Oswald's shooting. So it was here where Jack Ruby was alleged to have kind of snuck down past this concrete abutment and been down in the basement well and truly in time to shoot Oswald. Now, while we're standing here, I'm going to point out, I'm going to turn around a little bit so you can see the street, just over where those traffic barricades are across the road. We'll head on over there, but there was a cab driver at the time that morning, parked literally facing, 45-degree angle, facing directly over here to the ramp. A cab driver by the name of Harry Tasker, who apparently was sitting in his car, keeping the meter waiting, keeping the meter running for one of the out-of-town reporters. So Paul Cisco had commissioned him to basically stay there and wait for him to come up out of the basement once Oswald's transfer had gotten underway, having left the basement through the ramp on the other side out of Commerce Street, out onto Commerce Street. And Paul Cisco wanted to come straight up here and jump into the taxi and then follow Oswald's convoy to the county jail in Harry Tasker's cab. Well, of course, he never got to do that because the shooting happened right at the start of Oswald's transfer down in the basement. But anyway, Harry Tasker got to see a lot of the comings and goings up here at this point before the shooting. He pretty much exonerated Roy Vaughan when he testified to the Warren Commission by saying that really Roy Vaughan never left or walked out into the street like others alleged that he had. He pretty much stayed at the ramp, at the top of the ramp, and if anyone left that came by here, it was after the shooting, when cars started to come out after the point of the shooting. Tasker said that he saw, he wasn't sure if he saw anyone walking down and coming back up the ramp either before or after the shooting. It was never definitive, and the Warren Commission certainly tried to really overcomplicate the statement that he was giving by really getting down into the fine detail of how exactly his cab was positioned. So that's Harry Tasker. We'll head over the road and check out his position from there. I'm just going to swivel around now, and where that stop sign is across the road is where Patrol Sergeant Don Fluchet was parked. He was on duty that morning, and he was listening to the happenings on the radio, just hoping to at least be here and around when the Oswald transfer started. He didn't have anything to do with the arrangements, so he was just sitting there and listening in, basically. Now, he knew Jack Ruby at the time, and in his position there, again parked up on the side of the road and looking across the street, he never saw Jack Ruby walking all the way up Main Street, if at all, that morning. So someone that knew Jack Ruby, who happened to be parked across the road from Main Street and looking at this ramp, looking back at the annex building, he never saw Jack Ruby. To his credit, Don Fluchet did report that to his superior, Lieutenant Earl Knox, who apparently in turn reported that up to Captain Cecil Talbot, but that never made it, or was never officially acknowledged by the DPD investigation, the FBI, or even the Warren Commission. Don Fluchet's story really only came to prominence 15 years or so later with the House Select Committee on Assassinations. So Don Fluchet was parked across the road. So I'll jump over to both positions so we can see kind of the kind of location that both Tasker and Fluchet were standing at, or positioned at. So here I am just across Main Street, looking in the position that Harry Tasker was at. So you can see a 45-degree angle his cab was parked at. and he had an unobstructed and very clear view. Reported that there were a few people milling around just out there, so Roy Vaughan being at the mouth of the ramp, but there was never any reports from these witnesses of a big crowd, and that stands to reason because no one expected Oswald's transfer vehicles to come out of this side of City Hall, because that was always the point of entrance. It was never an exit. So let's move on down to Don Fluchau's position. So this is where Don Fluchau was parked, so pretty much opposite the entrance into the annex building. And if I just pan across a little bit more, you can see his view of the Main Street ramp as well. So these two witnesses really helped back up Roy Vaughan's account that he never left the ramp, and he certainly didn't let anyone into the basement. Now, about just under a minute before the shooting, the plans changed for Oswald's transfer. They went from him being put into an armoured truck to instead the armoured truck just being used as a decoy in the convoy, with the intent that Oswald would instead be transported in a car. So to enact that plan, Sergeant Rio Pierce was instructed to take a car out of the basement, and he actually drove it up the Main Street ramp. And there were two other occupants in that car. There was Sergeant James Putnam sitting in the passenger seat and Billy Joe Maxey sitting in the back. All three of them would be asked about Roy Vaughan's position as they drove up the ramp, and none of them said that he moved out into the middle of Main Street, that he only stepped aside to let them out. So that's important because it was used against Roy Vaughan, that because as he was stepping out, that's how Jack Ruby, he left the way open allegedly for Jack Ruby to sneak down into the basement. But like I say, the credible witness statements really back Roy Vaughan up on the fact that he never left the ramp. He only ever stayed there, and therefore kept, was fulfilling his duties as kind of guarding that ramp entrance as a possible way for Jack Ruby to, of course, sneak into the basement. So Roy Vaughan exonerated. So if Jack Ruby didn't enter down the Main Street ramp, how did he get into the basement in time to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald? Well, behind me there you can see the annex building, and I'm standing back down near where the Western Union office was. So I've come back down here, and behind me is the annex building, and you can see windows on the side there overlooking this vacant car park. Now that's pretty much how it was in 1963 as well. So those windows were there, and this vacant lot was also there. So some researchers contend that Jack Ruby actually may have somehow been signalled out of those windows up there, and that is what triggered him to come and approach the building and basically see the start of Oswald's transfer. I have a slightly different take. I actually think that Jack Ruby himself was the signal. So when it was seen that he left the Main Street Western Union office, so about the point that I'm standing now, that was actually the signal to get the Oswald transfer started, because that still would have given Ruby plenty of time to get into position down the basement and not down the Main Street ramp. Let's show you how he actually entered the building. So where we're standing now, I believe this is how Jack Ruby could have only entered the City Hall complex to be down in the basement in time to shoot Oswald. And the only way the way that he did that was to walk through this door, whether it was let in or it was left unlocked. And once he was past these doors, he would have walked along a very short corridor and through the back of the service elevator that was in place. There was like a service hatch that he could have walked through that was there for, again, contractors to get in and out of the building through. Walked along the first floor in the building inside, made a quick right to walk down a stairway to get him down to the basement level. Now the doors at the bottom of that stairway were not locked. They couldn't have been locked because it was an emergency exit for the annex building at the time. So if in the event of an emergency, people would use that stairway to evacuate down into the basement and wherever else after that. So I think that was Ruby's route down into the basement, and of course because everyone would have been looking that way down in the basement, with their cameras waiting for Oswald to emerge and for the transfer to start. I think that it would have been very easy for Ruby to just quickly walk across the basement car park, climb through the railing at the bottom of the ramp, and be in position to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. So now we're on the Commerce Street side outside the Annex building, and you can see that a lot of the original buildings, or buildings that were in place back in 1963, are still across the road. Just a bit further up the sidewalk there is the old City Hall building. So let's take a walk, because we'll see where Oswald's transfer was meant to depart from, and be able to match up with some of the footage that shows the ambulance, of course, leaving to rush him off to Parkland Hospital. Okay, so behind me is the Commerce Street ramp exit, and again that's sealed as well. Back in 1963, this was the point of exit out of the ramp. I gather now it's how cars now enter, but back then this was the exit point. So you might recall footage like before Oswald's shooting of the armoured truck arriving and backing up and reversing down the ramp. It's kind of been part of the narrative ever since that the truck tried to back all the way down the ramp to be in place for Oswald to be loaded into. That was never meant to be the case. The Harold Fleming, the Armoured Motor Car Company president, he knew that the armoured truck they were sending would never fit down the ramp, so it was never the intent to drive the armoured truck all the way down the ramp. He didn't want to either, because apparently it had been installed with a new battery that morning, because they had to jump start it. So it was never the intent to have it parked on the ramp down in the basement. If nothing else, not just for size, but for fear of potentially it stalling and not being able to start with Oswald in the back. So if you have a look at footage on that day as well, you can see once the armoured truck is in place, it's really interesting to see, reporters would mill in and out of this entrance. They'd shimmy kind of alongside the armoured truck once it was in place. So security really was pretty lax. You couldn't see too many people being checked, if at all. But this was where Oswald in the ambulance came out and was taken back down Commerce Street and onwards back to Parkland Hospital north of Dallas, so the Commerce Street ramp. This is pretty cool. I'm standing under the Commerce Street steps, and down there you can see a stairway that goes at least to the basement level. I want to take you down there because it's not just interesting that these steps go directly down to the basement level, but there's something else pretty cool that's still down there that I think played an important part back in 1963. So let's head down. So we're just at the bottom of the Commerce Street steps. I've just walked down the stairway. So above is the entrance up into the City Hall building off Commerce Street, which is just back there. Now behind me is a little doorway, which I think was in place back in 1963 as an entry and exit way down into the sub-basement level of the old City Hall building. Because crucially what was down there at the time was the locker room where police officers would come and go for the beginning and starts of their shifts. And I think, just having a look at the layout here, this was how police officers were able to enter and walk down another stairway down into the locker room, another level below. Now down in the locker room, it's interesting, there was an unidentified man in the minutes, even up to an hour before the start of Oswald's transfer. He was down there by himself, and he was actually encountered by two porters, Alfredia Riggs and Harold Fuqua, who had come to the sub-basement locker room, thinking that they'd be able to watch the transfer live on television down there in the television that was in the locker room. And when they got down there, they ran into a man who was already in the locker room, telling them, look, there's no need to stay down here. There's no point watching the transfer on television. It's not going to be shown live anyway. So Harold Fuqua and Alfredia Riggs, for some unknown reason other than that, were encouraged to not stay there. I think that's pretty important. They never were able to identify, or I think were never encouraged or pushed hard enough to identify who the person was, and it's certainly never shown up in the record either. I suspect that that could have been Charles Blackie Harrison. Blackie Harrison was an acting detective at the time, and he went to the Deluxe diner with another officer, Lieutenant Miller, for a coffee, and Miller came back to City Hall and returned to the third floor bureau, but Blackie Harrison, it seems like he didn't. So I contend that he possibly could have come back down Commerce Street, down these steps, and used this entrance point to get down to the sub-basement locker room and kind of hang out there. Because what was also down there was payphones. Now, potentially, he could have been maybe someone that was standing by those phones, taking phone calls and being in position to kind of help set up the shooting of Oswald. We know that he didn't go back upstairs to his office with Lieutenant Miller, because when Blackie Harrison did move up to the basement in time to be there when Oswald's shooting took place, a fellow officer, I think it was Wilbur J. Cutshaw or Roy Lowry, said to Blackie Harrison when he saw him emerge from this direction in the basement, "Where have you been?" So it's like he hadn't seen Blackie Harrison for a few minutes, or maybe even a few hours, more likely a few hours. So all Blackie Harrison could say that he'd come from the vending, from the locker room down in the sub-basement, having bought some cigars from the vending machine. So there was no real, that was the only accounting of his time, other than much earlier in that morning around 8 o'clock when he went to the Deluxe diner with Lieutenant Miller and by Detective Miller. And by Miller's accounts and Harrison's as well, he was actually spent a bit of time on the payphone at the diner. So what he was using the payphone for at the diner versus and who he was talking to is interesting, and particularly considering he very well could have spent the next couple of hours, a portion of it at least, down in the locker room where there were more payphones, and where he could have been, it could have been the man who discouraged Alfredia Riggs and Harold Fuqua from being down in the locker room with him. So that's speculation. Blackie Harrison was never pushed on the point, and it's just another one of those little threads, another one of those little tangents that unfortunately we can only speculate and continue to ask questions about. Now I'm standing at the top of the Harwood Street, or at the Harwood Street entrance into the old City Hall building. I'm standing in front of a stairwell that went again down under the main entrance, down to the basement level, and I think this is how Jack Ruby's would-be attorney Tom Howard was able to enter the basement and be down there in literally the seconds, if not during the point in time when Oswald was shot. I also think that this is how porters Alfredia Riggs and Harold Fuqua were able to gain entrance into the basement as well, in their quest to find a television and watch Oswald's transfer. It just points to the fact that there was no security here, or none acknowledged anyway, as Tom Howard, being a civilian and attorney, was able to enter down here, and so were the two porters who had been asked to leave their normal positions in the eastern end of the basement over under the annex building. So again, another unsecured point of entry into Dallas City Hall that morning. So that's it for my walking kind of tour of the outside of the City Hall building. Really interesting, you know, you write and research a place for so long, and to finally actually get out here and check out the edifice of a place. You know, it's still in the way it was back in 1963. So just super interesting to get out here and see all the points of entry where Ruby didn't and did enter the basement. I'd recommend anyone to come up here. Unfortunately, like I say, you can't get in and check out the the actual exhibit inside at the point where Oswald was shot. But if you stand close enough to the ramp doors, there are glass panels that you can look down and see the point where Oswald was shot, at least. But yeah, hopefully this has been informative. It's been great being in Dallas to speak at the conference. I've been able to take a few people around, you know, this kind of walk around the outside and shed light on the Oswald shooting, because it really is a topic that it needs a bit more research. There's so many aspects to it that have been kind of left uncovered. So hopefully this video and my other work helps and make the case that you know, Oswald's shooting really ought to be looked into a little bit more. So thanks, and see you next time.